Acting before realizing. Most of the time we do this, but we don't always know how. Acting before realizing. What is that? That's affordance with two F's. Affordance. It's what I always told you about Jan Rami, or high performance or blind faith. In high performance, you're also acting before you realize it. Yahami is that experiment where people begin to imitate a being to transform that being, and it leads to high performance. It involves beliefs, habits, beliefs, and blind faith. Blind faith isn't meant in a bad way here. I'm speaking blind faith in a good way. When you truly focus on doing something, you can't even see or hear the noise. It's focused, blind faith, focused, not in the bad sense of being unfocused on something wrong. No, blind faith is extremely focused. High performance affordance, but the right affordance, not the bad one. And that's what we're going to explain today. So act before you realize it. When you start to detect it, is very good for you. That's bad news. If you're under 25, it's harder to understand this live stream because that top-down maturation, which starts from the part where neurons begin to root from back to front, penetrating here in the cortex, top-down occurs between 25 and 35 years old. And there you can have metacognition. With metacognition, you'll better understand what I'm saying. Now, if you're not 35, just believe it and look at the text I'm sending. I'll send you some text, do some research, and you'll see that it's true. But the thing is, you'll see that it is, but you won't have the full heartfelt understanding because you don't have metacognition. You need to have metacognition, and for that, you need to be old. You need to be 35 to really get the most out of this live stream, even if you're over 35. But if you're under 35, look, do some research, take a look, and you'll see what it's like. It's so important to know this because big tech controls you and me and everyone trying to gain our attention span, and it controls our actions before we realize it. And we're going to see the secret today. We're going to see this secret today. How big tech, how some ideologies, how some beliefs, how some sects control you, how some games control you. Where is this control? How can you be acting without realizing it? Today, we're going to see this. We're going to look at the timing of this. We're going to look at the potentials evoked. We're going to look at some emotions. Let's look at some dominant molecules at the time of a certain emotion. Let's see if we can see it. Let's go. Let's play and see if there's time. Look, so the first thing is affordance. Affordance is a term, it's just a term. The important thing about this term is that you act without realizing it. Look, I'm talking to you, Itchy. I didn't realize I was itching, and I already scratched. That's acting without realizing it. I get up, grab the chair, leave, make a noise, get up, do it, but I don't realize it. Yes, it's 150 milliseconds. A second is one divide. 1 in 10 times, two little parts is where this action will appear without realizing it. Look, what a big deal, right? You're acting without realizing it. What's that, right? And that's what we're going to try today. First of all, regarding these emotional activations, it's important for you to know that the brain, let's think about the brain now without the mind and consciousness. Of course, there's a mind and consciousness, but only the brain. When it receives a stimulus, it responds, it emits little screams, it emits evoked potentials, it evokes a wave. I place the EG on top of the brain and watch it, it gives a stimulus. And suddenly it gives a wave, it gives a peak outward, and these stimuli occur quite often in several stages. We will study 2, 3 stages. Today we will try to study from 1 millisecond to 200 milliseconds, then from 200 milliseconds to 400 milliseconds, and then from 400 milliseconds to 900 milliseconds up to 1 second. What happens in the brain from 1 millisecond to 1 second? Wow, very cool, very cool. And you'll understand how there are many things in your life that you're doing without realizing it. And you don't know that someone is controlling you, or that an algorithm is controlling you, or that the game is controlling you, or that the ideology of your church, or your pastor, or your politician, or whoever, or the television program, or whatever is controlling you. So now you'll see the technique of how to control, or better yet, not to control people, how to have metacognition and get out of it, get out of this control, this invisible hand that controls us. And you'll see that it's a reasonably simple thing. It's not that complicated. First, you have to have a sensory gate. The brain is here. In fact, it's here. And you have a sensory gate from 1 to 200 milliseconds. We'll call this the sensory gate. First, let's think about sound. Let's start with sound, which is easier. When the sound enters, there's a wave that the sound starts with, which is an auditory evoke potential, which is almost a brainstem potential. You'll see these complicated things later, but the wave enters, the sound enters, and each stage that enters the auditory part emits some waves. Basically, it emits 7 waves, okay? 7 waves, 8 waves, okay? Which will be for the auditory part. But this is up to 10 milliseconds. It's very fast. It's almost the sensory gate. If your sensory part is measuring the sound that's coming in, that's important. So from 1 to 200 milliseconds, you're basically filtering what's going in. You're not even leaving the thing. It's not even mental or conscious. There's no mind, no consciousness there. It's a stimulus, it's biophysics. The stimulus is entering. How will it reach the brain for processing? First, ABR, auditory evoked potential. The sound enters several stages of the auditory system and gives off little shocks, some potentials appearing in the brain. When it reaches P50, which is the positive wave at 50 milliseconds, it's a wave that will filter out repetition. If something is coming in repeatedly, we're talking about milliseconds. If something is repeating in milliseconds, for those who study music, I think it's the fusa. It's a very fast thing, very fast. If something comes in repeatedly in milliseconds, it's filtered out. The P50 is doing this, and the P200, it already starts selecting what might be important. The P200 is something that could be important. So the P200 is something like that, man. This is important. It's in. So we're talking about 1 millisecond to 200 milliseconds evoked potentials. This is extremely important for you to know. Evoke potentials. When they evoke this, what's important in the midst of all this confusion I'm talking about? Sometimes people put you through it. They work with surprise, with expectation, with fear, with anxiety, with anger, with disgust, with joy, with pleasure, with connection, and with belonging. Do you understand? Now you're starting to get it. This happens in games and can be seen on the internet and social media. Surprise, anticipation, fear, anxiety, anger, disgust, joy, pleasure, connection, and belonging. Wow, these potentials need this small input to get there. Understand? For example, fear and anxiety, which is FOMO, the term that says I'm going to lose this, already starts to appear in the N100. It's a negative wave in 100 milliseconds. Anger into disgust, also in N100. In 100 milliseconds, anger into disgust already appears. Before you realize you're disgusted, when you realize it, you're already disgusted. And social media makes that happen. So before you break the news, disgust already appears, and you'll be disgusted by the news that's coming. In 100 milliseconds, joy and pleasure are already a positive peak in 200 milliseconds, okay? And connection and belonging are also positive in 200 milliseconds. What am I telling you? That these emotions you feel on social media and in games are very well programmed in milliseconds. So, okay, just so you know, when you leave the 200 milliseconds we're talking about, this sensory gate is arriving. Look, the sensory gate has already placed you in fear, anxiety, joy, pleasure, or belonging in 200 milliseconds. You're not realizing it. You're already doing things with this emotional charge. I'll talk more about emotional charges in a moment, and I'll talk about the molecule that the brain triggers with these charges. So what happens now? We're going to leave this part of the ABR, this part of that one, to 200 milliseconds that filters what's going to pass. And now we go to P50, N100, and N200 are what can enter the mind. The ABR, basically, which is the auditory evoked potential, is very fast. It only filters what will pass through. What won't pass through, it physically blocks. The connection doesn't let it through. But when it reaches P50, N100, P200, it's already entering the mind because it has these emotions. It's already configuring the mind. These emotions and every emotion causes an emotional shock. In this emotional shock, you impose restrictions on bodily movements or tensions or the flow of tensions or bodily movements and visceral ones. So the viscera also experience tension. So much so that fear, look at fear, creates tension. Heartbeat, breathing, and some of the internal organs. The stomach sometimes feels a little tighter when fear hits. So, do you understand? We're talking about the following. When it's going to pass to the mind, we're talking about 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds. But it's mine, but I'm not noticing it yet. No, you're not noticing, I'm not noticing because it's very fast. These are things, it's less than 200 milliseconds. I can't perceive it. It's a glimpse. It's something very quick. Yes, very quick, but it already gave me an emotion. It already fixed an emotion in me. Before such news, a sign, a marking, a noise, a little sound to give you emotion, and I put that news with that emotion, for example, of disgust, or I present that news with this emotion of joy. So I'm already modulating the consciousness that you're going to receive the news I'm going to give you. That's why I told you that democracy is a big theater of a bunch of people, and whoever controls the program controls your vote. Because before giving you information, they first disgust you, then give you information. Then they make you happy, then give you information. You'll vote for happiness, you'll vote against disgust. And who controls the program? Who controls the information that comes into your head? Who controls social media? Who controls newspapers? Who controls the news? Who controls the news? Controls this informational process in your head. I know it gets a little complicated sometimes, but it will gradually increase. So now we're going to go from 200 to 400 milliseconds. Now it's not quite one thing is the mind, but we're not going to talk about the mind if in 200 to 400 milliseconds we have the hijacking of your attention. My attention is hijacked, or your attention is also diverted, directed in that period of 200 to 400 milliseconds. Before that, something happens, the brain clicks. But between 200 and 400 milliseconds, something starts to change. It's an attentional bridge. So, for example, you're playing a game, running, playing a little game, and suddenly an obstacle appears in front of you. Looking at it here, it looks like the obstacle in front of you, N200. There's a potential invoked in your head, N200. Okay, obstacle in front, 200 milliseconds. Your attention was hijacked because there was an obstacle in front of you and it triggered in your brain. 200 milliseconds. This 200 millisecond triggering in your brain can scare you. It can even surprise you. Understand? How the emotion is going on top of the stimulus I'm giving you. Okay, but at some point, something was also happening at a certain frequency, and suddenly something different appeared. It's the P300. The rare stimulus happened, and the P300 says, wow, how important is this? How rare is this? What am I going to do now? This wasn't supposed to happen, and it's happening. This is hard to happen, and it happened. Doctor, 300 milliseconds. Divide a second into three parts, and then you already have your attention hijacked. Okay, that's the idea, okay? So you have up to 200 milliseconds. You have a sensory portal. Basically, what goes through the ABR is up to 10 milliseconds. Then what enters the mind is 50 milliseconds. 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds around there, P50, N100, P200, okay? Then pay attention from 200, we will talk about N200 and P200. P300, okay? It captures your attention. And now memories and decisions, 400 to 900 milliseconds. You could call it the LPP. It would be this more positive or activated part. You can activate the negative side or the bad side or the good side. It doesn't matter. You're activated in some way with this LPP. It's memories and decisions. So evaluation, a variation of this sustained emotion, you stay negatively or positively for a longer period of time with that positivity or negativity. So this is 400 to 900 milliseconds. Interesting. It's important. For example, suddenly you're in a good joke, right? In a good joke, the guy starts telling it, and you, in half a second, you caught an emotion, suddenly a bad emotion, then a sexualized one, or an emotion of great fear or great disgust in half a second. But suddenly, when it gets closer to a second, then you realize that that joke, those words, weren't meant to be. This fear thing was just semantics, which is a very pleasant thing. Then you laugh because you were tricked, you were a wave of perception, and it was another wave of perception. At the top, the joke engages, plays with your perceptions. It starts you to put yourself in the rhythm on a path of interpreting something. And that interpretation in 400 milliseconds is going one way, and suddenly it reverses course in 900 milliseconds. Oh, it wasn't this, it was that. Oh, and you laugh. So the little joke is also there at around 850 milliseconds, close to a second. Of course, you, me, or one of your friends won't get the joke. Depending on the joke, they won't get it. But that's usually the joke. You go down a path for half a second, you think it's a path, and then it sinks in about a second later and you laugh. That's the joke. Okay. And that's all there is to potentials. I won't burden you with neuroscience and evoke potentials. The thing is, these potentials, this game, these things, and these emotions, surprise, anticipation, fear, anxiety, anger, disgust, joy, pleasure, anger, belonging, it creates a lot of. The brain releases a bunch of molecules. These molecules act on the synapses. How complicated, Jackson? No, it's not. We'll keep it very simple. It depends on what surprises and expectations you have. You interact with a certain type of molecules, these molecules that act within you. And these molecules are neurotransmitters, of course. These molecules, in some way, make you engaged, addicted, addictive. For 72 hours. Isn't that cool? 72 hours is a nice term. 3 days, 3 days, it's a nice term. You get high, you get addicted to a set of emotions. These sets of emotions, I'm telling you about these sets of emotions I just told you about. So, the set of emotions you get addicted to is the following. We'll talk about it now. Which emotion will I get addicted to? Or is it naturally addictive? Or do you get really activated by those emotions? Surprise and expectation. If some game, some religious leader, political leader, some social network, throw Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it doesn't matter which one, throws you surprise and expectation, it's throwing you a dopamine spike. Surprise, anticipation, dopamine spike. How does this happen? From a dopamine spike. You get a dopamine spike when you have intermittent notifications. One notification comes, then another. News, 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 notification, 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 another. Then you get a dopamine spike. You get activated. You become addicted to dopamine because your algorithm is throwing surprise and expectation at you. The surprise and expectation, which I mentioned to you above, is something. In these inputs up to 200 milliseconds, you already have a certain surprise and expectation, but there may also be P300, there may be these additional potentials invoked. But have you noticed? Surprise and expectation, dopamine. The neurotransmitter dopamine facilitates the transmission of more information in some areas of the brain. It's dopamine. If your social network is catching on, or if your religious leader or political leader or your father, mother, son, uncle, or anyone else is working you through fear and anxiety, look how cool fear and anxiety give you that FOMO. Anxiety, fear, and the anxiety of missing something. You might miss something. You'll miss that show. You won't be there. You'll miss that news. You'll miss that book launch. You'll miss that game launch. You'll miss it at that moment. Cortisol. Too much vigilance, cortisol. So you get a huge cortisol rush from social media, from WhatsApp, Twitter, social media, Facebook. You get a rush of cortisol telling you if you lose, this will happen. So you have the fear of losing and the anxiety itself, and cortisol spikes in your bloodstream. Fear and anxiety, we're talking about the 100 millisecond smoke. I may be triggering fear and anxiety for you. What is 100 milliseconds? When social media throws you some information, some toy, some sound, some noise, a song, a little video, something jumping around in a certain way to generate fear and anxiety in you. Launch such and such a day, you're going to lose fear and anxiety, cortisol, elevated cortisol, you're activated. If you're activated, this network that activated you can keep you, and if it returns, activates you in less than 72 hours, it keeps activating you. If this social, religious, partisan network, whatever, doesn't activate you with this fear and anxiety for 72 hours, cortisol levels drop. You're back to normal. But if you activate it in the middle, you still get a remnant. Of course, when you sleep, things stabilize, of course. But the next day, you get that fear and anxiety again. It activates again, and you stay activated. That's how our teenagers are. That's how we are for much of our lives. We sometimes live activated, but activated with surprise and expectation, with fear and anxiety, anger and disgust. Anger and disgust are interesting things. Anger and disgust will release two neurotransmitters inside you, cortisol and dopamine. You get activated with cortisol and dopamine. Dude, you're scared, you're angry and disgusted. But anger and disgust, what's that? How am I supposed to do it? Dopamine together, what's that? It's polarized debates. If there's a political debate, you get angry and disgusted. Anger and disgust. You don't like this one, you like that one. You get angry and disgusted, and you get addicted to cortisol and dopamine. A combination of cortisol and dopamine gives you a 72-hour activation loop. You get stuck. You want to see that news, that thing again. You stay addicted for 72 hours. Yes, but if those 72 hours started back in your childhood, they continue until you die. If it is repeated, which is what happens, for example, in most cases of beliefs and religiosity, you always perform a ritual before 72 hours. Because if you spend 72 hours, that belief loses its strength within you. You lose the connection. You lose that 72-hour loop of addiction to na descarga from neurotransmissions within you, from the release of dopamine, from the release of cortisol within you. Then you have joy and pleasure. Also, joy and pleasure are dopamine. Also, dopamine, joy and pleasure. So, where do you get that? In the likes and excitement while you win the game and little likes. You posted a text online, then you get a little like. And it was read by a lot of people. Dopamine. You have dopamine. And sometimes there are children and teenagers who post something and get a little anxious because they want that dopamine and no one is liking it. And then they get depressed because where's my dopamine? It's not really depression, it's addictive. They're experiencing withdrawal syndrome. You wanted the dopamine hit with your like, but the dopamine didn't come. You're addicted to dopamine. Making a post and getting a like became addictive. Look how impressive this is. You understand how important it is. You who are over 35 and begin to realize that we are being used, that our brains are being used by big tech, generating thoughts of disgust, anger, and fear. This generation of these emotions controls our ideology and our stance on things, and we, in fact, are being controlled. Look how interesting this is. And then you have bonding and belonging. Bonding and belonging are interesting because you'll get oxytocin and serotonin. They're two very cool hormones that we like, but they're also addictive. Bonding and belonging, you go through social interactions and such, and you'll have oxytocin and serotonin. So, guys, what am I telling you? The brain is a machine. When you give it stimuli, it releases a bunch of molecules into it. To give you these molecules, which are neurotransmitters, you can get addicted to cortisol, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, so you can become dependent on these neurotransmitters. And this dependence is because you're stuck in anger and disgust, fear and anxiety. Surprise and anticipation, joy and quick pleasure and connection and belonging. You're addicted to it. And if social media is giving you this, it's because it's already read you. It already knows how to control you, control your attention span. I take your attention span and monetize it. Social media doesn't really want to take complete control of you, it wants to monetize. How does it take your attention span? By giving you the drug you like. You like anger and disgust. Oh, my disgust. Fake news for you. Oh, you like a world of joy and pleasure, jokes, 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 joy and pleasure, jokes, and you're addicted to social media. Oh, you like to feel more human, connection and belonging. But in the digital world, it doesn't exist. It does. The dopamine rush comes, and you want surprise and anticipation. Okay, notifications. I don't know what. Look what happened. Look at the news. And you're addicted to social media, and your life is slipping through your fingers. And you, all your time spent on social media and social media monetizing your time, your attention. Folks, that's what I wanted to leave you with today. Be careful, pay attention, know that your brain naturally responds to the stimulus it receives. And this response creates emotions. And even these stimuli in front of you make you act. Before you know it, you're already doing it. But you think you're doing it by your own will. No, you're not. An emotion has been triggered in you and someone is controlling you. So controlling because it triggers that emotion in you and you go this way. It triggers that emotion and you go the other way. And you think you have free will. And I'm talking to you, metacognition, 25 to 35 years old. Maturity. Why am I feeling this? Why did I get emotional? Why do I believe this? Why do I believe that? Why do I feel this? Why do I feel that? And then you have a thought about what you think, what you believe, what you perceive. A metacognition, a big hug to you. I hope you enjoyed it. This is Fordenza. You do things, you act even before you realize it. And this affordance is 150 milliseconds. You're already doing things. Of course, it depends on our cultural background. It depends on how you were educated since you were little. This is Yahami. You simulate being to transform yourself into being, transcend yourself into being. So, cultural background also helps with this. And then you naturally see a chair. You already have the sensation, the sense of being able to sit before realizing it is a chair. The